Yeah, so it's just going to be 2-minute intro for those who don't know about our group. So for those of you first time with us, Serverless Toronto started 8 years ago as a meeting place for function service developers, but during COVID, we migrated to online format, and over time, we realized we could help businesses by working smarter, not by breaking faster, and we started defining serverless not just as a tech stack, but as pragmatic mindset, a way to focus on business value. And this broad definition of serverless lets us explore many IT topics. So if you visit our YouTube channel, you will see lots of educational content. Much of it is still highly relevant. And how we arrive to these topics. I'm IT consultant, so I normally get inspiration for meetups from work, like the problem I see my clients wrestle with. But I'm sample of one. So for upcoming meetups, I would ask you to drop in the chat or DM me on LinkedIn, like what you are wrestling with at work, what AI pilots have stalled, I know many do, and what integration points you go through. So really anything that would help us bridge this gap between business needs and IT work, that's a fair topic to discuss. And that will shape the upcoming meetups. And then we're also lucky, to have Manning Publications as a knowledge sponsor. They donate a book every month, but these couple months, they were really generous. This time they gave us 5 ebooks. No survey will be needed, so I will just drop 5 coupons at the end of the meetup. And share the info about the book, so you can kind of first come first serve basis. For those of you who don't get lucky, for free ebook, you have 45% coupon code. So enjoy the savings. So scan the code. And before I pass mic to Mark, let me explain why this topic. So this is a part 3 of our agent trilogy. So in the part 1, you saw how to build multi-agent system from scratch. Part 2 show that model calls is the easy part. The real work is everything around that. And now that we're all building agents, the problem we have to solve is agents are scattered across laptops with credentials nobody knows about or can revoke. And the dashboards that look like a control sit on the broken plumbing. And there is no easy way to isolate teams' agents from one another in the enterprises. So under that all, there is a question of what's still worth building yourself, because you have Amazon Bedrock, Google Vertex AI, Microsoft Foundry, even Databricks. They already carry the heavy lifting. So Mark, big thanks for accepting my invitation to close this trilogy and explain to the folks how you do that. Please take it away and introduce yourself for those who don't
Sounds
know
great.
you.
Hey, folks. So I'm going to share my screen here. Actually, no, before I share my screen, I'll give a little bit of an intro. Yeah, so I've been in the machine learning space primarily for 10 years, and then started my company in end of 2022. It's called Prompt Advisers, and it came about because the hardest part back in the day was helping people to write a prompt, and in some ways, it is the same problem today, just in a different vehicle. And yeah, we have a team of around 7 folks now. And we do enterprise implementation, enterprise strategy, SMB, AI strategy. So a lot of stuff touching how to use agentic coding tools, how to implement AI, A to Z. And yeah, so today I'm going to walk through basically a basic overview of our implementation of agents at scale in enterprises. Now, as we've worked with different companies, it can become very complex, lots of different hoops to jump through, things like GPDR, HIPAA, all that stuff becomes a huge concern. But I'm going to give you the mental model as to how we approached it and how we're noticing other companies' approaches as well. So, in the beginning of the year, the world was shocked by this new renaissance of Hermes agent and OpenClaw, and everyone was losing their minds about pretty much a wrapper with a series of tools. It's just the idea that you could use it on your phone was very novel. And the fact that it felt like it knew you, it felt like it had some form of identity was very novel. But it was only the solopreneurs, the tinkerers, people like us that really took advantage of it. But enterprises were just left on the side saying, okay, well, we have an Azure subscription, we have a Bedrock subscription. We don't really have this kind of look and feel. And even if we did take something like an OpenClaw, we don't trust it. There's so many things that are red flags, from the GitHub repo leaks to the secret leaks. It was just marred in a lot of distrust. So basically, what we started to do a few months ago was not just build a system for our community members on a personal basis rather, but we also started thinking, what would this look like for an enterprise? So basically, like, how could you spin up a series of agents that you knew for a fact had no ability to read certain things? Or if you were logging in as an employee on a team, if you built a system that was multi-tenant, how do you make sure that someone could use an agent in a way where their IAM roles are inherited by said agent? And basically going through all the really boring stuff to come up with a system that we could build on and use as our bedrock, if you will. So, just as a small preview, this is a shell of our solution, and this obviously has developed a lot more over time. This is kind of like our V0. Now we have probably like a V10 that we're working on, and some companies are using and implementing to date. Basically, like, how do we have this command center experience where you can set up your own agents, and every single time you set up an agent, it is not some rinky-dink agent living on a consumer API. Every single one of these agents lives in Amazon Bedrock, at least on the AWS side. And when you start a new chat and you have some form of conversation and you send it over, it can go and actually check the policy gates, check what information you have access to, and come up with a response that's grounded in whatever's in your infrastructure. And you can maintain things like your sessions, your usage. You can watch your costs, your input tokens, your output tokens. You can see what different MCP tools are connected, which again was another barrier. People were adding all kinds of skills and apps to make their OpenClaws, something like a Jarvis, but enterprises really couldn't play in that arena. So we went from being able to just spin up these agents that behind the scenes propagate to something like Amazon Bedrock to then being able to have Slack implementations where you could talk to what we called Claude Claw back in the day. Now, as Claude is having a bit of a negative renaissance, it's going through where it's performing poorly, it's really expensive, and people are moving to Codex and OpenAI models. Now we have a adjacent Codex Claw implementation where you can have the same kinds of conversations. You can ask it to make images. And all we did was how do we map every single functionality of OpenClaw and Hermes agent and bring it and find an enterprise version of it. So if you've ever worked in data migration, database migration, how do you map out every single functionality and find its enterprise likeness or its enterprise microservice that you can implement in AWS? Has this worked in Azure? Yes. I'm just not an Azure expert, so we have someone on my team handle that, but it's the exact same concept. And both AWS and Azure have the ability to go one to one with most of these tools, and they have a good parity of resources and services. GCP, similar to Gemini, sometimes eats crayons in the corner, and it doesn't have all the functionality that they have. So AWS is probably the most, not just robust, but it has the most to play with. And because they wanted this Jarvis experience, I'm not going to demo this right now, but you can talk to this Jarvis. And the cool thing that we did is that we fully integrated this Jarvis that's using purely SOC 2 compliant text to speech and real time API, and it can control your entire UI. So I can tell it, go on the overview, break down the costs, tell me what microservices we're overpaying for, and you can have that kind of experience. So, how do we give you that look and feel? But you can do it in the nice, safe realm of enterprise deployment. You can monitor their usage, their costs overall, and more importantly, they can create spending caps because if you've ever worked with AWS, it can eat up compute at a very eye-watering rate. So, how do we make sure that every single time you talk to an agent, if you have a spending cap for the day, we have a way to intercept that? And I'll show you some mental model diagrams as to how we thought about this. Then we have an audit log, and then we get to the pure security side where we have a series of kill switches where whoever is the super admin in this portal would be able to just toggle off any one of these things and it would shut down the microservices and basically lock everyone out that was using it. So how could we give that peace of mind and also doing things like DLP and exfil guards? So looking for very odd types of messages being sent to help find prompt injection, not just using language models, but also using very deterministic NLP techniques. And then we have similar like you would a panic button anywhere else. When you click on this, it literally shuts down everything across the board. And then you can obviously set up things like your security posture, IAM role policies, and we even have like an AI policy drafter because if you've ever drafted it by hand, you'll know how painful it is. And then we have this compliance checker where you can always look at your infrastructure and tell you, okay, based on the latest and greatest about SOC 2 and everything internal that we have, how compliant is our setup? And same thing if we care about HIPAA or both. And then we have a few more things here, and then we'll dive into a lot of the conceptual background. When it comes to integrations, things like Azure and AWS have native MCP tool stores or marketplaces that most people don't know about. So you can hook up to Slack, Salesforce, Jira in a way that is adjacent to one click, where once you sign in, it will take you to the marketplace, you can add in your credentials, and you have a gateway that you can interact with different tools and actually bring them to speak to your agents. And outside of that, it comes down to very 2023, 2024-esque technology where what happens if you want to share a series of files in your knowledge base and you want all of the agents that you set up across the company to inherit said knowledge. So being able to create a very straightforward implementation of RAG, retrieval augmented generation, and being able to test it very easily. Outside of that, these are just additional things like we call this thing the hive mind. So having different agents that you set up in your workspace all share the same memories if you want them to. So that's where a lot of the customization comes into place. And obviously, as a very playful person, we have something called the war room, where when you set up agents, if you want to have a group chat with all of them, again, how do we give you full feature parity for everything that you see outside, but instead of just having your fingers on the glass, looking at everyone having fun? I don't know if anyone's ever seen the little meme of what's it called? If you've ever watched SpongeBob SquarePants, again, I'm really dating myself here. Maybe myself, Squidward meme looking out window. This meme, this is basically most enterprises when it comes to watching people play around with OpenClaw and Hermes agent because they couldn't do anything about it. It was not fair play. So how could we give that experience? And then, like we said before, single tenant not helpful for companies, but multi-tenant where you have full understanding of who has access to what. These are obviously some demo accounts here. And how can you quickly retire, suspend, or change policies on the go, monitor all your members, and more importantly, give them permissions. So who can view what the agents can do, who can view the costs versus actually edit things, who is an owner, and what is every single policy associated to that person. So that's a very quick TLDR of what it looks like. And the four questions we asked when we started building this is really the questions that companies were asking us. Where does the data go? How long is it retained? Who can revoke access? And which agent touched what action? Those are the four fundamental questions where, okay, we need full traceability. We need full logs. We need to fully understand where is data at rest, in transit, and to the final destination. Being able to map all of that on its own, even with AI, is a Herculean task because especially when you're dealing with SOC 2, you have a lot of things around your neck that you have to be aware of. So next up, when it comes to the overall premise here, there might be something you might have heard of. It's called an Agentic OS, stands for operating system. Fancy word for different layers of the onion they have in any agentic system. Now, I like to always think of it like opening up the Earth's crust because I love analogies in that way. Every single agent has an identity, a series of rules and hooks. You have skills, you have some additional agents that you can call upon, and then things like tools, APIs, MCP servers, connectors, and command line interfaces. These layers together make up individual agentic OS systems. And when you go into real companies, you will find that you'll have to create different agentic operating systems for different departments. So marketing will have a completely different identity, a different set of rules, a different set of skills, and different agents that make sense to set up. Same thing with finance. They will have payroll systems. They will have different APIs that you're going to want to connect to. So how do we make sure that we always are in a position where you can keep implementing all of these layers and more importantly, understanding that these layers will decay and rot. So it's one thing to build the system that lets you interact with Bedrock in this fancy way, in this UI driven way where everything that you do on the front end propagates to the back end. The next part is understanding, okay, now that we have these agents, what happens to them? So like I mentioned, identity. If you ever worked with Claude Code or something like Codex, you have a Claude.md or an Agents MD. That's really this initial file that gets auto-injected into every single session that you have with them. So how do we take this concept of identity and inject it into our agents? And how do we make sure that when you talk to your agent via Slack, via Telegram, via the dashboard, that it always is grounded in its identity and what it does and what its main priorities are? If you are less familiar with the word hooks here, hook is basically a deterministic rule that fires when a specific event happens. So how do we make sure that on top of the identity, that it respects things? So if you say, go and push this to GitHub, it knows for a fact it has to scan through and shoot an event that executes a script that looks for personal identifiable information or key things of interest. So next up here is skills. So I won't over-explain this. Many will be aware. It's pretty much a glorified series of prompts with a SOP of exactly how to execute something in what order. And then you have the agent, and in this case, our agent has a prompt that lives in an S3 bucket. You have the model choice that's also attached to it in a YAML file, and what tools it has access to. So overall, we have a built-in tool. We have an MCP gateway through AWS that we enable to talk to different systems as needed, let's say like Salesforce, and then you have some live system data. And this is the part that, like, let's say if you leave this talk today with anything, even if you forget about the enterprise deployment, this concept's really helpful because most companies that we consult for, they get really excited when they finish this whole agent project once. But as soon as you finish building agents or an agent, that is the moment where you start inheriting tech debt. Or in this case, we'll start calling it agentic debt, where the moment you finish a rule and a series of skills, you now are on the hook to keep maintaining them. Because every single brand new model that comes out, whether it's from Anthropic or an Asian model, whether it's Kimi K3, or today I think we got GLM 5.3, I can't even keep up at this point, you have infinite models. And if you want to be able to mix and match different models, pay cheaper inference to use an agentic system, you have to be aware that if you adopt a brand new model, you might have to revisit, not might, you will have to revisit your skills. And you have to ask a fundamental question. What, if anything, needs to change about them to make sure that we're optimally working with the right model for the right use case with the right skill at the right time? Similarly, Boris Cherny, who's the inventor of Claude Code, he said recently that every 5 to 6 months, you want to actually consider deleting all of your skills, deleting your Agents.md files, deleting your Claude.mds. Because as these different language models behave in increasingly smarter ways, you will need less skills. A skill is a crutch for a model that is unable to conceptualize this SOP very well. But in the future, as we keep getting new models, a good example is recently Claude 5 Opus, which a lot of people have nicknamed Slope Slopus because it has performed very poorly. People notice that if you deleted the majority of your skills, it performs way better. So in some ways, the skills and extra instructions hold it back from peak performance, not the other way around. So each one of these layers, whether it's the agentic layer, the skills layer, the identity layer rather, if you look at this graph here, we have fast rot and we have low rot. Low rot means you might not have to change the identity file of who you are, what you guys do every month or even every quarter. But things like an agent, and you have to assess, things like a skill you have to assess, could be weekly, monthly, or quarterly. For myself, I have an aggressive take on skills where every single week I have an automated cron job go and check all of my sessions. And it basically audits, do I still need this skill? Or could this skill be some form of overall rule? Could it be some form of agent of its own that doesn't need to be a skill per se, but a series of instructions? So being able to understand and prune these systems, whether it's a personal one or one that scales to enterprise, is really important. Now, in terms of the configuration, obviously, the goal was how do we set this up so that a company could take our code and we could help them get up and running in 3 to 4 hours? And how could we make it not a one-click deployment? It's basically IAC, infrastructure as code, that we're able to share with them so it can start to set up things like their Fargate services, like their DynamoDBs to store conversations, conversation history, all the audit logs, etc. So the system kind of looks like this behind the scenes without getting too much into the weeds. We have, on the network side, we have storage, we have DynamoDB, we have secrets manager and password manager. On the IAM roles, we have tons of guardrails around making sure that the right person is able to access the right data through the right agent. And then all of these things related to cost. And then when it comes to messaging, obviously we're using Bedrock as the inference layer. We're using something called event stream to be able to have that back and forth conversation, especially if you want to be able to use the features like the internal Jarvis. And then we have things like backup and making sure that we always have different copies of different agents so that they can be spun up if needed. One additional thing that I didn't show you is we have the ability to do a one-click pause where let's say you're running this infrastructure and obviously, just for maintaining microservices on AWS, you can easily rack up a bill of $1,000 without even invoking a single agent, not even using Bedrock inference. So just by having the infrastructure. So how do we create a one-click pause that pauses all the infrastructure needed, except for the very fundamental ones, to go from $800 a month to $100. If you want to just put it on pause, make some changes, come back to it later. So trying to be very thoughtful that when you implement something, that there's not only an off button, but also creating a pause button, which we found as we spoke with multiple clients that this was of importance. Now, just zooming in ahead here, let's say we go from our Slack, just like to give you a mental model. So let's say I send a message from my Slack here, and what happens once it leaves Slack? Okay. Behind the scenes, we go from Slack message and then it goes through our load balancer and it gets routed and then it eventually hits our Fargate and then it just double checks, is everything compliant? Does this message contain anything malicious? If not, then it goes to Bedrock. It goes to Converse Stream, which allows us to stream that conversation, and then it checks any guardrails before it responds back to make sure that the response it came up with isn't responding to a malicious request. And we check both the input and then the output in relation to the input. So a couple extra checks, but if you keep optimizing this, you can still make these chats very performant and like pretty quick as well. Now, jumping ahead here. So this is what it looks like. You have some form of auth that is invoked once you send the message. We just double check the identity file, assuming that this user has access to this agent. We double check admissions, whether or not we have permission to send another message based on their spending quota. Then it finally, after that, hits the model, and then we do a scan on the response. So that's like the exfil guard and the DLP. Can you build this in different ways? Absolutely. Just like mapping this out very logically, just to break this down, in its simplest form, it could look like this. And that's why there's a huge emphasis on cost because many companies implement AI thinking that it will just derive ROI very quickly and not understand that behind the scenes, you could be spending thousands of dollars and accomplishing nothing. Just a series of tinkerers on your team that are using it for things that you could probably use either an existing subscription for or not use language models at all, right? So how do we make sure that cost is always also paramount on top of security? So making all the proper atomic conditions and checks to make sure that nothing is invoked unless it absolutely needs to be. And then on the safety side, we obviously have different filters, like we mentioned before, allow lists for tools, and doing all the additional scans that we need. And then obviously I won't get too much into how we do auth, but making sure that when you have IAM roles across the company, how do you add someone in a way that, again, you don't have to necessarily interact with AWS. The real challenge was if we wanted to help a super admin not have to deal with the back end as much and do everything through the front end, how to make sure you have all of that capability. And if not, how do we allow someone to use an AWS command line interface to use something like a Codex or a Claude Code using either Bedrock or Azure to be able to manage this entire pipeline and make it their own. So how do we give them the implementation, the 80/20 of the rollout, and then how do we give them the keys to the castle so they can take it and go from there? So then in our standard setup with like 5 to 6 different agents and all the different things that we track, we could have up to 32 DynamoDB tables. You could switch these for a combination of DynamoDB and other database types. Excuse me. If you really needed to use something like a very heavy RAG and you're willing to spend the money, you could spin up like an AWS Kendra, which is another type of database, which is very native to vector databases and doing all this kind of semantic lookup. And then everything else here is really reliant on the company itself. So your key management services, your secrets, uh, how many S3 buckets, how they're configured. We have a very basic implementation that we just build on as needed. Now, in terms of the knowledge path, like I showed you before, the little RAG section, the whole point of it is that people can upload either programmatically or through the UI, PDFs, docs, audios. We then extract that information. We do some very basic chunking. We're not doing anything too crazy here, although depending on the implementation, we can do something that's called agentic RAG, which if you're not familiar, we can employ basically a cheap workhorse AI model to loop through every document, read every page, and that agent has its own prompt that says, go through this page and synthesize the TLDR of the core messages here, or the core most memorable things about this page. And then we take those, and instead of chunking, we basically do pseudo-chunking by having a cheap model, let's say a open source model like a Kimi at the time, Kimi 2.5, loop through every single page, create a summary, and we just store the series of summaries as the knowledge versus the raw pages. But we also store the raw pages in a separate DynamoDB table in case we ever need to revisit it. And then next up, we needed a way to be able to cheaply embed all of these chunks. And if you're not familiar with RAG, it is basically translating English or any language to vectors, mathematical vector representations, through what's called an embedding model. So we used a native Titan model that is actually from AWS. Most of AWS's models are kind of garbage on actually interacting with them. But when it comes to embedding, it's cheap, it works, and it's pretty effective. And then we do indexing of said vectors and all the chunks so that it's easy to retrieve like for like based on what's called cosine similarity. If you ever have done math in nerdy, I don't know, you remember your math from high school. Cosine similarity is purely you have two vectors. How adjacent are they based on this mathematical distance formula? One of them is cosine. You have all kinds of ways to also create semantic similarity without using cosine per se. You have other formulas, but this one is more so the naive vanilla industry standard. So just want to make sure I'm mindful of time here. Yeah, this one is not too important. This is much more so about the infrastructure, making sure that as we switch containers, that we have redundancies in place. Double check here. And like I said, with the kill switches, this was kind of a request from a couple clients that they wanted to build the ability to take any single microservice, any functionality, and shut it down. So kind of like really emphasizing the fact that control, autonomy, cost, security, number one things, and like having the fun part was very last on the list. So the fun and the novelty of using an agent, taking it on the go, interacting with Slack, that became less of an important thing, and everything else around it, like the data model, the way you can interact with it, the different toolings that you could use in a secure way was very important. And then adding things like alarms. So alarms for errors happening in the system, errors with authorization, and dealing with things like scheduling and having these little canary smoke tests every single time there's a deployment. That became very important as well. Having a way to manage file validation and just redundancies and setting up backups for DynamoDB. So the overall system looks something like this. So you have, your core identity, you have your models, you have your bootstrapping, and then you have some locks and making sure you can fence tokens. You have a heartbeat that basically is similar to OpenClaw. That was kind of the core thing that people were super excited by, where it basically just pings its own server to see, is there some form of job that I should be executing right now? Just mimicking that in different ways. And in our case, having that heartbeat saying, has anyone used the system in the last 15 minutes? Let's just triple check that they were allowed to use the system. And let's just double check if they pulled data, what data that was, a small snippet of it. So having increasing redundancy checks. And then just making it easy that when you deploy, that every single time everything is guarded, you're not deploying some secrets. And we're also employing things like hooks to check on deployments to make sure that when they're pushed, that there's nothing too risky, that is being implemented in the system and being able to easily roll back. Which leads to this slide. So we have different redundancy for the different images, the containers, the overall infrastructure. We have a config that a super admin can run. And getting to this point really comes down to cost. So we were asked, all right, if we were a very small company, non-for-profit, but we actually still have to be SOC 2 compliant, what are we looking at depending on infrastructure cost? Now, luckily, 3 years ago, when I had to be more of a nerd in AWS, I would have to set this all up myself. I'd have to size it. I'd have to do some back of hand Excel math to extrapolate cost or trust something like CloudWatch forecasting. But in this case, because you have access to the AWS CLI, which is on it, we used this one command line interface to build 80% of this infrastructure. And then the 20% was us actually going in and tinkering with UI elements just to make sure that the policies were correct. We had the right microservices. We didn't have a size of a container that we didn't need. But it really comes down to these kind of costs where it could range from anywhere between 130 to 180 a month, depending on how low maintenance you want your infrastructure to be. At reasonable testing, like piloting infrastructure cost, it could be like this a month, $300 to $800 a month, depending on the stack of choice. And then this is pre-inference, so you're not even sending requests yet. So if you're trying to use a Claude Opus or a Sonnet, you're going to run quite an eye-watering bill. So the real value in AWS Bedrock is outside of Claude models, which was the main appeal for many people. You now have access to increasingly more open source models. And I think there's DeepSeek on there now. DeepSeek V4 Pro just came out. You have GLM that came out today. You have Kimi. So if you even look at a lot of statistics across the board in North America, many companies, especially in the US, are increasingly using Chinese models in inference through Amazon Bedrock, just because the cost is just such a huge difference. And if you have an application like this, where you're trying to give this agentic look and feel to a company, for most tasks, 80% of them, you won't see a difference because you're not going to use a system like this to go do your agentic coding via an agent. Maybe you're going to do some testing, just double checking on things, managing your email, managing a Jira ticket or a linear ticket. But for actual agentic coding, that's when they might use these more expensive models. So the core focus is obviously were initially we started as single tenant to prove the concept, and then we started adding, different tenant ability to be able to manage them, adding that native vectorization layer, figuring out how and where to use MCPs and where it makes sense, how to audit the MCP registries to make sure that any MCP that is used, because MCPs are notorious for having backdoors, insecure streaming, etc. How do we make sure that it's grounded and we make sure that they have a verified list of MCPs that are relevant to them based on what they're looking to do? And like I said, adding that kill switchability and those network tabs and understanding all the different endpoints that are interfacing with their UI. And like I said, when it comes to actually implementing a system like this, if you're more curious on the client side, a lot of this stuff at the beginning is just understanding what are the goals here, and outside of the cool bells and whistles, why do you want an agentic system? Like, what is the value to you? Okay, your employees want to be able to do XYZ on the go. You're not a big fan of Slack bots, and you want to be able to get them more involved and excited about AI and less fearful about it. Cool. So, what department would you like us to start with first? Do you want us to start with the department with the least secure asset issues, where let's say we're dealing with marketing, right? That could be our first pilot department. Then once we prove the concept there, people start getting excited about it. Maybe we move on to finance and we move on to HR. So most times there's a take it from here model where we just bring in the 80%, we walk through the structure, we help them set it up in like 2, 3 hours, knowing that by the time we come back 2 months from now, it will look very different because their IT teams will come in, change things, retrofit, switch things around. But how do you give a company the 80% and then allow them to get to the 20% either by consulting or upskilling their employees as needed? And I think, yeah, outside of that, sake of time, those are really the core things here. And just to go back to this, being able to just like look at your main dashboard, go to any one of your agents. You can also adjust all of their system prompts from here, which notoriously, I don't know if anyone has seen this thing called Grokbot came out in the last 48 hours. It is yet another. So if not familiar, I saw a couple head nods. Oh, no, that's not that. Let's do this. So things like this have gone viral on X, and obviously I can imagine that it's going viral because Elon Musk has a has a vested interest. But this is Grokbot, literally brand new. Whole concept is literally the exact same thing that I just showed you, where you can create a brand new bot you can employ from their existing bots, and I can say search, let's say negotiator, and then you can just add your plugins, and they're trying to make it enterprise friendly as well, where you can just one click to Gmail, Google Calendar, Granola. Um, as you can see here, AWS agents as well, so you can bring those in as needed. And a lot of the industry is just reinventing the exact same concept and reskinning it increasingly. So there's very little difference from what I just showed you that we built versus this, outside of the fact that for this one, you need a premium Grok plan. So obviously the industry is reaching a bit of a plateau where someone came up with a great idea for this OpenClaw thing, and then it manifested in 100 different knockoffs, and now it's manifesting in all these different attempts to look like you're building something new, but it's the exact same thing where you have an agent, and this agent has access to its own VM sandbox where it can use things like computer use, and every single thing that you can do here, you can build yourself from an infrastructure standpoint. So nothing is novel here. And if you're ever in a situation where you're selling to enterprise, that is where you can use these things as inspiration, strip it apart for what it is, which is basically a wrapper on top of a model with access to tools, plugins, its own sandbox environment, and all of the stuff you can spin up. So there is a lot of opportunity to make these kinds of systems enterprise friendly by using a lot of the mental models that I showed you, but also building on them with your own expertise. Because I'm not a AWS prodigy per se, but I know enough to be dangerous for sure. Yeah, and with that, I know it took a little bit more time, Daniel, but hopefully it gives you a good TLDR.
No, this is amazing. Thank you. Thank you. So, but now most of the folks here at the technical, they're drooling, how do I get my hands on this? So I know, like, I know this is not sales pitch, guys, but like you used to have open source product as well. Is it still available? And then you have community where we have access to it. Like, can you explain people how to start either contributing or if they're in sales, helping you sell or get engaged or like, what's the next step from your point of view? So,
Sure. I mean, like two things. One, if there's interest, I'm happy to open source a shell of what we've done. If it like helps provide good infrastructure blueprint, if you want to take that blueprint and just throw it into your agent of choice
okay.
and start setting it up, you can just liaise with me, Daniel, and then I'll make that available. But alternatively, obviously, in our community, one thing we offer is not only this repo that we keep building on, it's the exact system that we use to sell to people. And yeah, we have some training around it, how I've sold it, the approach, the questions that you get typically in that kind of environment. So if you are seeking work, these systems are very interesting because they come up quite a bit because most enterprises, one, are distrusting of the average developer because they know that it's more difficult to deploy these systems in the wild. So that's why I spent 7 grand just to like tinker with every single permutation of
Hmm.
the system to build something that others
Hmm.
could take. And right now, quite a few members in the community are using it, repurposing it, selling it to clients as the vision, and then taking it and running with it. Where, like I said, every single implementation of an enterprise system
Hmm.
will be special snowflake. No longer are enterprises excited to get some cookie cutter solution like a Salesforce and having to learn how to use a Salesforce. Now that they know about the AI, they want you to give them the schematics, the blueprint, and the insurance that this stuff is secure. And then they want to be able to take it internally in-house and make it their own. So yeah, I'm happy to do open source a little shell that you guys can use as a guide. And obviously in our
Hmm.
paid community, we have the closed source version with the training, etc.
There is the old one you published a while back. Can I share the link? It's just on GitHub public repo, like something. The
You
old,
mean
old
like
one.
the personal system?
No, called Claude Claw minus OS. That's what I bookmarked a while back, but I never read it. Is
Yeah,
that that's
that
the
was not
original?
open. Yeah, that was not open source
Oh,
outside the
okay.
community,
Okay,
but
removing the somebody has it online. Glad I didn't post it. So, but there are ways to get to understand it. And what you are saying, like it reminds me of this Palantir's principle forward deployed engineer. That's why it's becoming popular because everybody has to customize it. So,
yeah.
so
So
it,
I'll drop here in the chat. So this is the one that I open sourced. This was like the very initial. This is not enterprise at all. This is
Okay.
basically our clever way back in the day, and I still use this system to this day, but now we're on like V25,
Mm,
where you don't have to pay extra API costs to
mm,
build your own personal agents. I just use Claude-P, which is a headless version of Claude, to interact with my existing subscription. And you can do the exact same thing with Codex, where there's a headless mode, where instead of you paying an extra $100 a month on API, you can just pipe your existing OAuth from your subscription and just talk to as many agents that you set up with some form of YAML file in the background for their identity, etc.
that's perfect. So I had to ask because these are
Of
builders,
course,
they want to play with something. But most
play
of the
away.
people are just going to look at the package and try to understand it and not do
Yeah,
anything. But if you want to go more, that community is really gold mine. It's one of the best subscriptions I mean. So thank you. Thank you for
of course. I'm so
allowing me
happy.
to be part of that. And yeah, can you share the link to the community as well?
Sure,
Many
yeah.
people, it's on the meetup cover, but like, and, and I think you
Absolutely.
were talking about like it's not easy. See, there are so many communities nowadays. So I know when I was shopping for one, like you were not the only one I was looking at a year ago. Can you explain people what else are you getting? I know why it's good for me, but what else you're bringing there? And you talk about some discounts, some special offer for members here.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm not a great salesperson, so I'll be very quick. I'm a good developer, but not a salesperson. So
Yes.
yeah, right now for the next couple days we have a free trial, so you can like literally
Oh,
try before you buy. You can just kind of go through the about page that I sent you. You should see it. And then in terms of the classroom, I show up every single week to drop brand new modules on different domains of AI. So, for example, this week I dropped I think it was 40 minutes. Yeah, 40-minute walkthrough of how I've been able to build my own local setup and build full assets with not paying a single API cost, how to build your own local harnesses, how to take something like pi.dev and use Claude Code to mentor and train your open source until it's good enough to fly on its own. So I try to go down all of these different avenues. We have, um, if you care about selling solutions, then recently I started 43 businesses since high school. So I basically
wow.
dropped 4 hours of every single way that we've been able to sell AI in the past few years and how to go about it. We have a consulting playbook. Obviously, we have what are called the living course. So every single week or week and a half, I will drop a brand new module, whether it's on context engineering, planning your workflows, how to really master things like building hooks and evaluating models. And then outside of that, and I'll finish my pitch off of this. If your members want a discount on the annual, more than happy to offer that up, and I can ping you that, Daniel. And then if you are an annual member, you get access to things like our coaching program and also thousands of dollars of discounts. If you go on just this join secret here, claim your perks. So once you have an account, you'll be able to access every single one of these discounts on different services that you would probably use day to day, and we subsidize all that ourselves on top of one coaching call a month with our coaching team. So if you go to something like EA Coaching, these are some coaches that I pay on payroll. Some are experts in AWS, in Azure, some are development and enterprise sales experts as well. And there's someone literally designated to help you with setting up this enterprise system. So that is the end of my pitch there, and that's
Wow.
all I can do.
Amazing. Very useful. Yeah. So any questions, guys? Like, uh, we still have time. I can stay after one. Mark may have hard stop. So uh,
All
ask it
good.
away.
Hey,
Anybody?
I'll start if there's no one else at this point. Thanks for your talk, Mark. This is very useful. It's a great, definitely a great system that you built. So in that,
Thank
some
you.
of the features you mentioned were also pretty subtle but very important that I mentioned, like given the pause button and all the other things. But my question is, I think I had two main questions. The most important question I had was in terms of data quality, right? In terms of data drift, and because everything in terms of an LLM is now an I mean, we think of it as only form inputs or database fields as inputs, but prompt is an input. Like our intentions are an input. It could be like a data lake kind of thing. Like files you upload as an input. How do you sanitize and how do you check for that data drift and that data quality before before it gets vectorized maybe for your rack system or before it gets into anything that the agent actually uses? Um, do you like how does that format into there? Is there a separate pipeline for this, or is it inherent in some of the pipeline that you've already built in? And not just the data for the input, but also the thing that an agent creates. Is there a data output quality filter sort of thing, or data output quality check, if you know what I mean, like in terms of that? So how does that format?
Sure. Just to clarify, so on the prompting side, are you asking what do we do to check for the prompts for things like injection quality, just to gauge quality? Yeah.
No, no, I'm talking. I mean, prompt is one, the
Yeah.
vector of input, but also the other vector is just the data input that you do, right? In terms of all the sources that somebody scans, in terms of that. And you did talk about like the drift. I mean, you did talk about the model drift, right? I think you in the presentation, but the same can happen with the data itself, or like things that we do, like shorter sessions, so that the context is not overloaded, kind of thing, right? So in the same way, like, is there something called a data quality, data input quality, data output quality checks for the entire system?
Gotcha. So the main thing that really happens is usually you upskill someone to be the data steward of that company that you're implementing this for. So they're like the AI, the data czar. So it's usually a handful of people that are in charge of being able to upload things. With those uploaded documents, the main things that we're looking for is one, are you uploading a format that we need to denoise to be able to add it to the system where we're actually embedding tokens that matter? So just to break that down,
Interesting.
when
Okay.
you have a PDF that you upload, not sure if you're familiar, if you've ever opened a PDF in a file editor, 60% of the PDF is garbage metadata
Yeah,
about
yeah.
the font, the format, all that stuff. So the number thing that we do on ingestion is we turn anything that has additional metadata of zero token value, we strip that all out. That's just through a script or a series of pipeline. After that, we do a quick scan to see is anything in this file somewhat too adjacent to what's in the database, meaning how do we prevent duplicate information? Because when
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have double to triple the number of vectors of the same document. When you
Yes.
ask a question, you have this infinite higher likelihood that when you get a top K of the top 10 matches, they're all going to be the same thing.
Same. Yeah.
So making sure that you have as unique files as possible so that your semantic search could be as rich as possible.
Correct. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And the same applies for an output, like an agent output sort of thing. Looks like is there a sort of a feedback loop where that data quality is checked? Is that also a part of this, like inherently part of the system?
Inherently, no, but what we have done for companies that asked for, because I do this
Uh,
for internal applications in our company, is every week it will go and pull all the conversation history, throw it into a language model that is looking for, has a rubric that we created as a YAML file, and it assesses
mm,
all the conversations with a rubric, and it takes the overall score across all of them, averages them out. If it's below, let's say, a 7 out of 10, it will investigate why. If it starts to come up with different recommendations for how we should adjust the system prompt, it will then send a ping via email with a button you can click. Here are the changes I'm recommending to the system prompts of these agents and some of the tooling based on the conversation review from this week. If I click approve, it will go and actually implement all the system prompts, double check itself, run some QA, and it's live in production. So I would
interesting.
say a 7 day trailing, assuming you have a reasonable
Yeah.
volume of
Yeah.
conversations, is good enough to determine is this worth a change or do we have to upskill the person using the bot? So you don't always want to blame the AI. Sometimes it's the person that
Yeah.
needs to be
Yeah.
blamed. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. And I think this also applies for something that you mentioned, like where you particular RAG, where you mentioned uh, you don't always store the full document. You do store the full documents, but you also store the summaries of those documents, right? So again, I mean, the summaries need to be correct because that is going to be used as the in terms of inference. That is what is going to be used. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Correct. So it's kind of like you create a paper trail hierarchy. So
Yeah.
you store raw in
Well
case
put,
you
well
ever need
put in
to
it.
find and ground it. Then you store summary. Then you
Sure.
embed summary. And only you know to go to raw when you start having trust issues with the summary for whatever reason.
Correct. Okay. Thanks for that.
Of course.
Next. I pasted the coupons in, so try use them. But it's only one book, not every book. So Mark, at the beginning, you explained your definition of agentic OS, but there is the second brain knowledge, like graphs. So how do you draw the line between those different approaches to similar thing, like help the community?
Knowledge graphs, just to clarify the
No,
question.
no. So knowledge base is like
Oh, knowledge
knowledge
base. Yeah.
management. Yeah. So like this, everybody's talking about similar thing, G brain, for instance, I don't know, second brain, agent
Sure.
OS. So where do you draw the line? It's very similar and it may pull people in different directions.
Yeah, so there's an overall hierarchy here. So an agentic OS is not a knowledge base. It's a basically it is your entire plumbing and your infrastructure of your ecosystem. So that's like the big picture is Agentic OS. Within Agentic OS, you can have a knowledge base layer. And that's where I throw things like your tooling, which is kind of like the outside layer. The reason why I keep it on the outside
Mhm.
is those tend to change quite a bit. It's more dynamic, it's less static. They need to be either purged or pruned over time. So when it comes to Agentic OS, that's the big picture. Then you have knowledge bases. When people say second brain, it usually refers to what is this very basic memory system. Let's say one that went very famous and viral was Obsidian, which is basically an empire of markdown files. It is basically a very shallow, naive retrieval where you ask question, tool, Claude Code or similar, invokes a command line interface. It quickly scans without doing any semantic similarity, pure raw grepping scans against these markdown files, pulls information that's the most adjacent to what you said. Then it comes back with an injection of knowledge, which is
Mhm.
cool for solopreneurs, solo practitioners. But at scale, if you had 10,000 markdown files, many of which, by the way, are stale and they die because people once they
Mhm.
set up the second brain, they get very excited for the first week, and then they stop maintaining it. And then that brain starts pulling completely irrelevant conversations as factual knowledge. And now you bloat your context. And in a way, I like to call this context poisoning. So second brain can lead to Alzheimer's of your actual agentic OS system.
Nice way to say that. Cool. And now that because you're talking about selling this as not selling like you're introducing to enterprise with max subscription, like there are lots of people saying, why would I buy anything? I can build everything. So what are the objections? How do you overcome those objections? When you get into enterprise, like I'm sure there is lots of startup founders here. So
Enterprise doesn't have max subscriptions. They don't have that. They have big agreements on token compute and they have token budgets, but they don't have a bunch of $200 a month
I
plans.
overgeneralize, but there are
Yeah.
objections. Everybody can do everything. Everybody has wings. And then it's so hard to sell.
Okay, well, obviously we're gonna have some bias here because like the one helpful thing is that we get inbound traffic versus us trying to convince. But most common objections is why can't you just consult our developers on how to do this and they just do it for us and we'll just pay you for the consulting and maybe the blueprint infrastructure. Okay. One thing I would say is actually that's not a negative thing. I would actually rather start there and have them go build it. If they can build it, then Godspeed. Super happy for them. We still have a good relationship. We accumulated some form of income from that engagement and we didn't get our hands in the weeds. Because the thing is, no matter how much you charge, even if you charge 40,000, 50,000, at the end of the implementation, you'll look back at the overall budget and be like, man, we should have charged more. And it's never not happened that we don't look back and we should have charged more. So for me, if you want to go low touch consulting, fantastic. And you think you guys are brilliant and you guys are so aware of implementing AI and you know all the blind spots, up to you. Here's the map, go for it. But you will find at least 20 to 30% of those people will come back with their tail between their legs saying, hey, we got stuck. Can you bring your team in? And now you have to make a different pitch where you might have to knock down all the infrastructure their devs did. And now you get into the room. Now their devs are against you because there's some ego on the table on who can do the thing. So the hardest part of selling is honestly dealing with the internal teams because as a tech person, many tech people have egos, especially those who are not AI native, but are really trying to look like they are AI native, even though they don't have the been there, done that of seeing failures. So my biggest objection handler is I would rather help you learn the lesson without the scars. If you're adamant on learning the scars on your own, I'm all the power to you. But I would imagine as an enterprise, you're low on time. So I'd rather be an accelerant and shorten the path between A to B versus you take this, you take my blueprint, you deconstruct it, you have a bunch of sprints, you break down a series of tickets for your team to try to understand what we already know inside and out to get to B and take a whole quarter versus we can get you to 80% in the next 2 weeks. How urgent is this for you? So it really comes down to urgency. How important is it for you to go from 0 to 1, start really accumulating the knowledge here and actually using the system versus, excuse my French or insert language here, mentally masturbating about how you could build this system, then trying to build this system and having a whole quarter pass. And now we have brand new frontier models that make the majority of the stack that you Frankenstein obsolete. So if you want to live in that world, totally cool. So for me, it's like I'm always ready to walk away from the table because we know what we bring. Being there, done that knowledge in every domain of software development, IT, that always carries its weight in gold. It always has, and I think it always will. And people will wake up. People are already waking up that um, not every AI implementation is the same. You can just follow 5 steps from Claude and expect that it's going to work perfectly, especially with all the permutations of microservices, tech debt, legacy code.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have to burn the forest to build the right foundation, and people don't want to deal with that very hard pill.
It's a brilliant answer. You should turn this part into commercial. And David's smiling. He's into sales. He knows.
I appreciate it.
So guys, we're a little bit over time. I don't want to keep Mark here, but like if you have another questions, I can stay another 15 minutes. Anybody else? So,
Hi, I've got a question.
mhm.
In the past, there was a lot of concern in corporations with hallucinations and unpredictability, especially for direct customer interactions and financial matters. How much of a concern is that? And is there some way to get around that? Thanks.
Okay. Now, the one I showed you obviously was internal facing, but in terms of customer focused solutions, hallucination can be mitigated if you build a proper system to check the answer at multiple layers. So there's this concept that's called grounded generation. And that's something that kind of like was born a few years ago. Let's say we were heavy users of something called Pinecone. There's this thing that came out called Pinecone Assistant. Back in the day, this was like cutting edge, where it would only give you an answer if that answer lived in the source information. If not, it was really good at saying, I don't know, or I do not have access to this data. So we now have more than enough infrastructure to be able to make an agent say, I don't know, which is probably one of the most important things to do, where it's not BSing on the fly. It's not like your your Amazon Web Store chat where I can make a Python game on demand. There's no quality control whatsoever on that agent. You can have a guard where human sends message, message is scanned for intent, message invokes inference, inference outputs response, then workhorse language model number one with rubric reviews answer very quickly, make sure that it is grounded in source information. You can also do some form of RAG attachment. And then if you're really paranoid, you can have workhorse very fast, very cheap language model number two, double check the answer before it finally goes back to the customer. And all this can happen if you have an optimized pipeline in an extra 1 to 3 seconds max. You can lower this to 1 to 2 seconds if you optimize properly. But there are many ways to mitigate wrong answers, ungrounded answers, and answers that are hallucinated. And obviously, even with like more frontier models, let's say Luna, which is a very cheap but very powerful model, if you do Luna on high mode, it is still 70 to 80% cheaper than Sonnet. And with that extra reasoning step, now it will check its own work as a part of its reasoning on top of the extra filters that you have. So if you build the proper stack and you use the right model at the right reasoning, that's still fast and cheap, you can accomplish this a lot better now.
Joe, I think this is good answer. Any
Yes,
sub
that's
questions?
a fantastic answer. Are you seeing corporations now being comfortable using that for things like financial transactions?
Oh, that's like fear of flying. Like you cannot control that.
The hardest part, Joe, is like the reason why they have distrust is unfortunately there are many practitioners, many agencies, and many internal developers that have masqueraded as knowing what they were doing, and they messed up. So because they messed up, they now have a black eye. Some of them have a black eye where they're distrusting of the whole thing because they've been burnt in the past. So I'd say the biggest objection that you see in the field is because they've been burnt, you need to acknowledge that they might have been burnt, and you need to create a very interesting pathway where you go, here's pilot, let's test it out for 7 days, and let's assess our error bar, and let's extend that to 14 days. Let's do 30 days, and just like hand holding or breadcrumbing that relationship with AI, with them, allows them to trust it more. Because once they see the error bar, you ask a very fundamental question. 7% of our interactions, even with all of these things, we're still either hallucinated or they're not ideal. In the grand scheme of things, what is the value add from an actual monetary and time saved basis from the 93% that was done correctly? What did that lead to as additional outcomes? What did that lead to in terms of time saved from agent referrals? Versus the 7%, what were the externalities from that? So if you break these things down into tangible, discernible metrics, and you break down that pilot model where you don't go full trust all at once, you're basically with someone that's been heartbroken in the past 100 times. How do you get them to believe in love again? You got to like you date, and then you were very soft, very fragile, and then they open their minds to that relationship.
Oh my God. That's why I love his group. Like he's sharing what's inside, but it's worth for me twice a month to meet him on chess like this every Sunday, I
Every-
think at 4 p.m. Or every other Sunday. So I'm
is
not
that
pitching the
helpful?
group, but it's
All
amazing.
good.
Thank you.
Is that helpful, Joe?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good sales approach. I think we're at kind of a critical time where CIOs are complaining in the news about lack of return on AI projects. And yeah, we need to come up with something to satisfy them. I mean, what do you think? Is there some way to use metrics to kind of reassure them that they're going to see ROI and not see hallucinations?
Yeah, well, the thing is really important, Joe, is especially CIO, especially ones that, again, I'm not being ageist whatsoever, but if they're older and they feel like I'm at the end of my career, I'm not trying to get a headache from this AI stuff. So the easiest thing for me to do is destroy the argument to begin with. So the three weapons I have is hallucinations, cost, and oh, look at what happened in the news last week. Those are like your three guards to destroy the AI conversation. So it might be you have to be a bit more direct and be like, okay, is this a belief issue? Do you have a fundamental like issue with AI? Like what does it mean that you didn't derive ROI? Let's break it down. Is it that you had an unlimited token budget and you are surprised that you spent a lot of money and not got a lot for it? Well, that's kind of an organizational issue. That's not an AI issue. What will happen in the future is similar to how every department gets a payroll budget for how much you can give your employees in terms of bonuses, budgets, and promotions. We will need systems where everyone has a token budget by department at enterprise. So finance, you guys get $15,000 worth of tokens. How you spend those tokens on what level, that is up to you. HR, you guys only need $5,000 worth of tokens. So being able to tangibly use AI with limits, hard limits right in place, which is why we built it into our system, that whole budget system. That's first and foremost. So that's a planning issue. Number two is an expectation issue. AI does not is not a magician. It's not a genie. It is an accelerant and it's an amplifier. The same way money will make someone who's a bad person basically show how awful they are. AI is also an amplifier for someone that doesn't know how to implement proper systems in business, especially at scale. So
Yes.
anyway, like
No,
these are
it's
not
perfect.
these are not comfortable conversations, but that like usually when I deal with kind of CIOs and let's say they're in the twilight of their career, I have to be a little bit more aggressive to really push them and keep asking the same questions of so what, so what, so what, until there are no longer foundational arguments with factuality and it's 100% emotion. And sometimes you need other C-suites in the room to see you have that argument to really open the conversation and show who is afraid of the conversation to begin with versus who's not convinced because they have very, very factual reasons why.
Joe? Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'd be a little reluctant to mention the phrase twilight of your career or other things of that nature. But in any case, yeah, that's an interesting point of view.
Yeah, I'm more so like telling you like my thoughts conceptually. I wouldn't say twilight of your career unless I was very, very perturbed. But it's more so like, do we have a fundamental cognitive issue with the concept of AI, or do you have a series of grievances that you can list out for me, of which none of them are emotional? If so, let's see how we can address each one of your grievances.
Mhm. I read somewhere there was a research, 29% of enterprise employees that were surveyed are sabotaging AI. Like I worked on the teams where we were introducing AI and they were just purposefully like slowing it down for project to fail.
Yeah, people are scared. People are very scared. And in some
Wow.
cases, deservedly so, because they're run by management that actually doesn't understand this stuff and thinks that it is magic. So that's why you're seeing a bunch of developers being rehired by the very companies that have laid them off in arrogance of what AI could do.
Any other questions? Much appreciated. We've had 30 minutes over. Anybody else? Or so, okay, so as for me, we have good takeaways. People have the code to look the open one. You will share the coupon code. Like people, like you can DM me here in the chat or in the group if you're interested to join Mark's community, and you're going to share the discount code there. And then what else? There is a mixture of technology, selling. I'm really happy you were here. Thank you so much.
Good. I'm
Any
happy.
other closing thoughts?
For me? No, I mean,
I hope it was good use of your time as well. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much,
thank you.
everyone. And we'll catch you another one in the future.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks.
Happy
Thanks,
Friday.
Mark.
Cheers.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.